First of all, thanks to Sinn Féin for bringing this motion forward on mortgage interest relief. And while, I think there would have to be some debate about whether this is the best way to assist, what I think it highlights is something has to be done to assist people who are being hit with these increased costs to service their mortgage. And, you know, I've certainly had quite a few messages and emails from people who've been pretty hammered with these mortgage interest hikes, and it's difficult to see how people can absorb these interest hikes at the same time as they're also seeing very significant increase in the cost of living at every level across the board. We saw the figures about food inflation today. We know about the energy price hikes, and the general cost of living is going through the roof. So this is another hit for another very significant cohort of people. And, you know, in the round, we are talking about, I mean, estimates vary, but ordinary workers, on average, probably €4,000 to €5,000 less well off than they were a couple of years ago. And that is a huge hit for people. So we have to do something. And the first call I would make on this government, given the sort of multiple hits people are making, I think we have to, and I'm not just saying this as some sort of rhetorical flourish to have a go at the government, but I really think we have to have an emergency budget soon to deal with the cost of living crisis that people are facing. And I think there's a whole range of measures that have to be taken, because what's been done, we can debate, you know, about who's, whys and wherefores, but it's just not enough, and something is going to have to be done. And I don't think we can wait till October to do it, because people are really being hit hard. Different people in different ways, but across the board, there is real pain being felt and hardship being felt by people. Secondly, I would say, you can't disconnect this from the issue of housing and the cost of housing. And I mean, I'll just give both ministers might be interested in this, because it's in Minister Carol McNeill's constituency, but also it's emblematic. I just went on daft.ie to look at house prices up in Cherrywood the other day, and the cheapest thing you could see in Cherrywood for very, very modest houses was in excess of €650,000, and up to well over €700,000. Now, this is the biggest residential development in the entire country. If it was delivering affordable housing, it was originally got planning, if you like, under the STZ for 8,000. It's been recently increased because of heights and so on. That would have had a major, major impact on the housing crisis in our area if it was sufficiently affordable, and in my opinion, if there was a greater proportion of social housing and so on. But at those prices, to me, it is just contributing to making a bad situation worse. And if there are people who can manage to get a mortgage, and you'd have to have pretty high earnings in order to get a mortgage on a property of that price, it's an accident waiting to happen if anything else goes wrong, as we know from the Celtic Tiger, where house prices were so high, people did get loans from the banks, then people lost their jobs, and we were in a nightmare scenario. So we cannot have house prices at that level, and we cannot have ordinary working people on average or even a bit above average earnings trying to service mortgages of prices that are houses that are that price. I just don't believe that's sustainable. I think it is an absolute accident waiting to happen. So we have to deal with the affordability of housing. And I mean, you know, that's a multifaceted thing, but in essence, I just do not see what the point is building houses that people can't afford. I just don't see the point in it. So the state, first of all, has to flood the housing sector with public and affordable housing itself. And insofar as it can, take other measures then to control the behaviour of the banks. And let's remember, one of the reasons why we have such unaffordable house prices in this country is because a decision was made, and I don't want to be overly political about this, but it's the truth, because it was said explicitly at the time, when, after the crash, the policy of the government was to refloat the property market after the crash. That was a conscious policy in order to restore the balance sheets of the banks. And it was explicitly stated by Michael Noonan at the time. Now, it might have seemed like a sensible idea. We didn't think it was at the time, but when you look at retrospect, it was a disastrous idea. Absolutely disastrous idea. Because the imperative to improve the balance sheets of the banks, to save the banks, has led us back to where we are now. And those same banks are still getting tax breaks in terms of losses brought forward. They're back to making extortionate profits, and we are in a banking environment where Irish banks and mortgage lenders are paying charging higher interest rates than anywhere else in Europe. Now, to me, I know the government won't agree with this, that is an argument for having a not-for-profit publicly controlled banking system. That's what you actually need in order to prevent profiteering, or whatever way you look at it, why it happens. And let's be honest, the banking sector in this country is in trouble, whatever way you look at it. I mean, some people think the answer is more competition. Personally, I don't. I just think it proves a competitive banking market is an accident in and of itself waiting to happen. And what you need is a credit system, a banking system, which is actually about serving the interests of society, not just making profits for investors, shareholders in banks, and ensuring that credit where it's needed is available to ordinary working people in order to put a roof over their head. And unless we get to that model, I think we are going to be in trouble. And then, along with that, more generally, ensuring that housing is affordable for ordinary people, and I just don't think the market has shown it. I mean, how many years do we have to go on before we decide that whatever role you may think the market has, and you'll say, oh, we have to have some role for the private market, it is absolutely clear that the private market is not capable of delivering housing that is affordable to the vast, vast majority of working people. The evidence is absolutely plain to see now, right? So maybe there's somebody out there who can afford houses for 700,000, but it is not the vast majority of people. And if we don't address that, messing around with credit in and of itself won't sort the problem. I do think on a more immediate level, quite honestly, the government has to think about just basic incomes. It's to help people through this, right? And that's back to the mini budget or emergency budget issue. People cannot soak up 4,000 to 5,000 loss in income, average workers. They just can't do it. And you know, again, it's an accident waiting to happen. People are going to get very, very angry unless we address that and address it quickly. But to my mind, one basic thing the government has to do, and I know they'll say, well, this could potentially be inflationary and all the rest of it, but I think people's incomes, whether they're wages, whether they're pensions, whether they're social welfare, have to, at a minimum, they have to keep pace with inflation, and they are not. And if they are less than keeping pace with inflation, then people are poorer and therefore are more vulnerable to all of these other things that are happening in terms of the cost of living crisis, mortgage interest hikes, or whatever. So to my mind, as a sort of an emergency necessary measure, we have to do that. We have to do that as well. But in terms of like the structural change that is necessary, the state has to be able to deliver housing that is affordable, and affordability means people should not be spending more than 20 to 30% of their net income on putting a roof over their head. Whether that is servicing a mortgage or whether that is paying rent, and if the state is not capable of doing that, we have a problem. And it clearly at the moment is not doing it, and the market on its own is absolutely incapable of doing it. Unless we confront that reality, we're going nowhere. Lastly, I would say we have to look at wealth distribution. Right? We have to look at wealth distribution. We don't even have proper figures on wealth distribution. But the Oxfam report, again, it demonstrates whatever take you have on it, is that the rich in this country are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. That's just a fact, indisputable fact. Unless we look a taxation policy that is going to start to address that gap between rich and poor, again, we are heading down a very difficult, troubled road. And I think the government have to start to look at wealth distribution. That means wealth taxes and even knowing where the wealth is in our society.